21st of September 2014. All over the world, millions marched together to demonstrate against climate change. In the middle of the historical march in New York that day was a politically active economist with access to those in power, Jeffrey Sachs.
Well, this is everything we're trying to do to make a decent world. And we have every means to solve the problems. We just haven't decided yet that we're really going to solve the problems.
Jeffrey Sachs and his team have set themselves a mission: to convince the decision makers of the world that disaster can be avoided without having to go back to the Stone Age.
The movement is really up and running. Now every country is thinking about climate policy.
It's a huge challenge. For the first time in history, scientists from around the world are trying to influence climate negotiations scheduled for late 2015 in Paris. But have they got what it takes?
It may be worth breaking the codes and breaking down the standards. If we really are at war with ourselves and the future of our children is hanging in the balance, maybe we shouldn't hold back.
We're going to hold all politicians accountable. It's not just today, it's every day between now and Paris, December 2015. Today we start winning. Thank you very much for all being together.
In the news tonight, the IPCC, the International Panel of Experts on Climate Change, have issued a warning.
Waves from the powerful typhoon Neoguri have hit Japan.
Melting ice may have reached record levels this year.
It is the worst drought since the People's Republic was founded.
The average temperature this year has hit a record high, yet there have been no heat waves.
Towns are submerged underwater with hundreds estimated to be dead.
With the ocean slowly eating away at the coastline, it could very well be the first state to disappear.
The Copenhagen Summit on global warming came to a close, failing to reach a consensus.
The 2015 Paris Summit must lead to the adoption of an ambitious agreement.
In the last 60 years, endangering 12 million people.
Our children and their children, a future that is beyond their capacity to repair.
Since the Earth Summit in Rio more than 20 years ago, there have been several UN summits on climate change, but never any real successes. Nevertheless, their goal is vital for our planet: to sign an agreement in which each country commits to the fight against global warming. To avoid catastrophe, the average global surface temperature must be limited to a rise of 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. In order for this to happen, CO2 emissions must be cut by half. Yet it remains to be seen just who will do that. That is the key challenge of the international summits. Jeffrey Sachs takes the 2 degrees Celsius target very seriously and has launched an ambitious project that has never previously been attempted: the deep decarbonization of the world's energy systems. According to Time magazine, Jeffrey Sachs is one of the most influential people on the planet. In the past, he has helped restore struggling economies in several countries. These days, Jeffrey Sachs is a special advisor to the UN Secretary-General and works on reconciling economic growth and climate protection. A believer in strong remedies and ever the visionary, he has come up with a brand new method to solve the climate change crisis. He has handpicked a group of leading scientific experts from 15 of the biggest CO2-emitting countries and set them a challenge. Each one of them has to write a report on how their country could reduce its CO2 emissions by 2050 without compromising economic development. The ambitious project is called Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project, or DDPP.
We've undertaken the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project as a way to show how it would be practically possible to deeply decarbonize the world energy system. By that I mean we have to shift out of coal, oil, and gas in order to keep the planet safe. It's really changing the DNA of the energy system of the world, which is not something that you'd want to do, too often, because it's not an easy task. But those who say give up on it actually don't know what they're talking about.
The final report is to be submitted to policymakers around the world. Decarbonization is the key word here. It entails massively reducing carbon dioxide emissions. The notorious greenhouse gas CO2 is heating up the planet. We produce it in abundance, and understandably so. It comes from burning oil, gas, and coal. The problem is, it's pouring out everywhere. From car exhausts, from the manufacturing of industrial and technological products, and from food production. Fruit and vegetables travel thousands of kilometers by plane to arrive on supermarket shelves around the world, no matter the season. Meat production also emits huge quantities of CO2. So how do we go about decarbonizing our world, which relies so heavily on burning fossil fuels without going back to candlelight?
Those fossil fuels have created our wealth, built our civilization, enriched the lives of billions of people. But now their rising costs to our health, security, economy, environment are eroding, if not actually outweighing their benefits. So we need a new fire that makes us safe, secure, healthy, and durable.
In order to choose his team of experts, Jeffrey Sachs contacted a heavyweight in global policy and climate analysis, the IDDRI, the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations. They formed research teams from 15 of the biggest CO2-emitting countries in the world: Germany, France, Japan, China, the United States, Indonesia, South Africa, India, Australia, Brazil, South Korea, Canada, Mexico, Russia, and the United Kingdom. Together, these countries represent 3/4 of global CO2 emissions. They're working on new economic models without CO2 that are compatible with economic growth. China will not have the same decarbonization trajectory as the United States. France's will differ from Germany's. They only have a few months to do it.
Our job is to convey the message, what would it actually take to achieve a 2°C framework? That's our job. We're not negotiating. Let the governments negotiate. We're problem solving. So we should be quite bold, but list the assumptions, because I think the power of this project will be if we're able to show together, here is a 2°C path. It should really direct to the question, what do you have to do to make this real? Because that's the last chance to make it real.
Useful discussion, and that may be strong. We try to harmonize ourselves in the language about that.
I think it's necessary, and if you've got the right kind of model set up to do this properly.
How to accelerate the speed of the transformation, and that will lead us to the degree target.
If we miss this 2°C window, which is already a tragedy for a lot of people, it will be a tragedy for everyone. Every day I'm surprised by how much time we're wasting, how much hesitating there is. It always makes me so cross. Not only are we the first generation to acknowledge this problem, we're also the last one that can take action.
To be able to move forward together, the 15 research teams must use a common working method, agreed on by all. That in itself is a challenge. What is the plan? Each country records its CO2 emissions by sector of activity: industry, transport, construction, agriculture, power generation. To decarbonize each sector of activity, there are 3 triggers. First, make all machines more energy efficient using technological advances so that they consume less energy. Second, replace fossil fuels with renewable energy sources. Third, produce low-carbon electricity and make everything electric that can be. Each DDPP member country must detail how it will operate the triggers of each sector of activity to reduce emissions to 1.7 tons per person. the necessary limit to stay below a 2 degrees Celsius rise. That is what a decarbonisation pathway is. North America is one of the hardest to decarbonise. The rate of emissions per person is one of the highest in the world. Jim Williams, an expert in energy efficiency and a DDPP coordinator, has drafted in one of the world's leading specialists from Berkeley's Earth Sciences Division, Margaret Torn.
The Deep Decarbonization Project was trying to see, is there a way for the United States to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions? So taking us from a country where we emit 17 tons of CO2 per person, which is kind of a lot, all the way down to 1.7 tons. And what these lines are showing you is that this is our target, but also, I'll just say, we did it. The UN DDPP analysis shows that we can do it. These deep decarbonization scenarios do not limit the economy. They support economic growth.
And they do not limit our lifestyle.
Yeah.
Now, if people prefer to get out of their cars, become vegetarians, wear sweaters, and so forth, that can be a fine thing. It'll make it all easier to accomplish and less expensive.
Right.
But that is not assumption that we built into our analysis. We assume that Americans still act like Americans 30 or 40 years into the future.
This is a huge challenge. The United States must reduce CO2 emissions by 90%. The hardest sector of activity isn't transport, as one might think, but industry. US industry remains the strongest in the world. Steel, chemicals, textiles, technology, automobiles. The industrial sector isn't quite ready to overhaul its complex production methods for the sake of the climate. Yet a surprising revolution is already underway somewhere in Michigan, where coal is being replaced by waste products. General Motors' giant 30-kilometer-long factory in Detroit employs more than 1,600 workers around the clock. Against all expectations, the auto industry giant signed the Climate Declaration, an industry initiative to drastically reduce CO2 emissions. Can Detroit, home of the US auto industry, set the example? Jim Williams of the DDPP is using this kind of initiative to trace a pathway for the United States. Rob Threlkeld, responsible for sustainable development at General Motors, grew up in Detroit. He refused to leave when the city was hit by economic decline. According to him, energy transition is the way to save this city.
The community, they understand renewable energy and sustainability it makes good business sense, which is why GM has signed on to Ceres under the Climate Declaration, because climate change is something we recognize and it makes good business for us. A sense for us to invest in renewable energy, invest into our products, which then reinvest into the communities. The city of Detroit reinvents itself. This is what the city's doing. A lot of it's in the area of green.
The deserted neighborhoods of what was once Motor City bear witness to the extent of the city's industrial decline. Could Detroit, declared bankrupt in 2013, rise again thanks to low-carbon energy resources? This year, General Motors received the Energy Star issued by the US government for its commitment to energy transition. But it is not a question of cleaner vehicles. The revolution is happening elsewhere. Rob and his boss, David Talauskas, are leading the change.
Reducing our carbon footprint, reducing our water footprint, reducing our energy footprint helps our bottom line. And the third value that we measure is in reduced risks. When we no longer send waste to landfill, Landfills in general are liabilities waiting to happen. So if we're not sending waste to a landfill, we're reducing our liability risks. We're reducing our future regulatory risks. We view waste as really a resource out of place, and these resources have value. So instead of sending them to a landfill, we look for new buyers, people who can use them as inputs. So we've changed our waste streams into revenue streams. And on average, we earn about $1 billion a year in selling our waste.
Every day, thousands of tons of waste arrive from around the city, and even from neighbouring Canada. For GM, the daily procession of waste disposal trucks to the Detroit Renewable Energy Waste Processing Plant has enabled them to do the unthinkable, to close the coal-fired power plant that supplied their electricity. Most of this household waste is made up of combustible materials, paper, cardboard, and packaging, which provide energy through combustion. The steam then generates electricity for the city, but not only that, it also provides energy for the heating and cooling systems at the car plant via a massive pipeline. Burning waste also emits CO2 gases, but 50% less than coal. According to the DDPP, carbon emissions from industry need to be reduced by 80% by 2050. But for now, in the United States, only 1,000 companies in the industry sector have publicly pledged to cut their emissions, like General Motors. It isn't nearly enough to transform the sector. But is there real political will to make things happen?
There have been two important recent changes in the US's position. The first is the Obama administration's undeniable will to change things. They're doing all they can regarding new standards for cars, coal-fired power plants, etc. The second is that there are companies, and more importantly, more and more US states, such as California, Washington, and New Jersey, that are deeply committed to a green economy, which will create economic growth for the future. California is experiencing an incredible technological revolution. Whatever the political context may be after Obama, everyone working for the summit in Paris will be the best possible advocates to ensure that the green economy continues to develop.
Although the Obama administration seems to have a good momentum going, it is essential that politicians follow step. A few months ahead of the Paris conference, Jeffrey Sachs continues his intensive lobbying. His goal is to convince world leaders of the urgent need to decarbonize. In an hour, he'll be standing in front of the UN. He is making last-minute changes to his speech, which will be the official international launch of the DDPP.
I'm going to have a chance to talk about the deep decarbonization project, what it means, and why we think it's important for next year's negotiations. But I think that people that are fighting the cause will take encouragement from today.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, the science and the reason to be afraid. If you're not afraid, I strongly advise you be afraid. Really. What's the U.S. plan for deep decarbonization? Does anybody know? Has anybody read it? You know why? It doesn't exist. The U.S. government, with all its majesty, has never written down a pathway of deep decarbonization. Why? Because Washington swarms with lobbyists. And so far, I didn't see ExxonMobil and Chevron here today. Maybe they are. But I didn't hear them say that they're into deep decarbonization yet. They're into more drilling, Arctic exploration, deep sea. And we are not going to get the results unless we actually try to get the results. And you can, what we're going to do, time. We've run out of time. That's precisely right.
In Paris, DDPP members led by Jeffrey Sachs and the IDDRI meet once every 3 months to continue their scientific works. Progress reports are given, and attention is drawn to any obstacles encountered in country policies.
It's incumbent on us to do more than just present our results. We're actually, because of the conventions, in order to be heard, we're going to have to challenge the way people hear these things and change the nature of the conversation around climate policy.
Although the United States have managed to establish a credible scenario, other nations are finding it very hard. The task is more difficult than expected, particularly for China, the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases. It requires a huge amount of effort on China's part to develop a pathway for deep decarbonization. The country is suffocating. Half of its CO2 emissions are the result of industrial manufacturing for the West. The blame lies with the coal-fired plants that are springing up every week to provide more energy, emitting not only CO2 but also toxic fumes. Air pollution is enhanced by ever-increasing road traffic. Current figures show that each person in China emits 4.5 tons of CO2 per year, which is 3 times too much. How can the country with the world's highest growth rate reduce its emissions to 1.7 tons per capita? At Tsinghua University, Fei Teng and his team are building a deep decarbonization pathway for China.
If there is no policy intervention, and if China follows what has been observed in other developed countries, the per capita emission will reach a quite high level, which is about 10 tons to 20 tons of carbon dioxide per person in year 2050. That will be something that this world cannot afford. The most important approach is to firstly design a compact city to reduce the transportation demand of people in the city, and also to use more electric cars. Through a combination of all of those various approaches, we can reduce and we can limit our emission from the transportation, from the urbanization in the future, which is not only a challenge for China, but also a challenge for the emerging cities in developing countries, which is going to be an urbanizing world in the next few decades.
Personal transportation is one of the luxuries of developed countries that most interest China. It is on this point that Fei Teng and his team are focusing their attention. By 2050, the distance traveled by each citizen will be 10 times what it is today, and the number of cars is expected to almost double. So how can emissions be reduced when the transport sector is booming? The decarbonisation programme is based on the model of Shenzhen, near Hong Kong. It is one of the 5 pilot cities designed by the Chinese government to become an example of the new decarbonised China. Thousands of taxis, subsidised by the state, have already gone through a major transformation. Making all vehicles electric is the only way to decarbonise the transport sector by 2050.
In Copenhagen, China regarded the idea of a low-carbon pathway a threat. They didn't want to discuss it. And just a year later, not only have they accepted it as part of the agreement in Cancun, but China is now saying that the aim of the agreement is to show that everyone must move towards low-carbon strategies. The Chinese are advocating it and are prepared for it, because the project is gaining momentum.
Around Shenzhen, commuter towns have emerged so that production lines at car plants in the region can run 24 hours a day at breakneck speed for low wages. The aim is to increase productivity by manufacturing low-cost electric vehicles. BYD, build your dream. It's all in the name. The battery specialist, which works in partnership with the German company Daimler, is banking on the Denza to become the world leader in electric cars. Li Yunfei, VP of Sales, has just been updated on what's new in order to give his marketing speech. Say goodbye to the traditional lithium-ion battery, BYD is about innovation.
This is our battery. They all look alike on the outside. But ours is a lithium iron phosphate, or LFP battery. It is chemically stable with a high capacity and high voltage. One of the distinctive features of our battery is its capacity. When fully charged, the car can travel 300 kilometers. According to our test on 100 vehicles, after charging the battery 4,000 times, it can still reach 80% capacity.
4,000 times 300 kilometers, that's 1.2 million kilometers. So the car will be sent to the scrapyard long before the battery.
There are two connections. One is for a quick charge, while the other is for a slow charge. The charging device uses constant current for a quick charge and alternating current for a slower charge. A battery charger is included in the purchase of each car. It plugs into a 220-volt AC power outlet at home, which is slower. Exterior charging facilities are much faster. It's done in an hour.
Autonomy, safety, and battery life are all elements needed to win the electric car market. But that's not all. Chinese consumers need to be persuaded to invest. Charging points like these are appearing around the city to recharge electric cars. Battery life is increased tenfold, thus mitigating the delicate problem of recycling. According to the Chinese scenario, making transport electric will help control the explosion of this sector's CO2 emissions in 2050. But on one condition: the electricity used must also be low carbon. Today, nearly 3/4 of China's electricity is generated by coal-fired plants. It's a real headache for the DDPP.
Why people in China building coal-fired power plants? They do not want to emit CO2 emissions. They do not want to have a city which has a lot of smoke. They do it because it is cheaper. They want to have electricity at home. They want to watch television. They want to use refrigerator. And it is the cheapest version. It is what America did, what the Europeans did, and now it is what they want to do. But we know the consequences. Therefore, we need to give them right incentives to make the cleaner technologies preferred option also in economic terms.
China has embarked on researching technology for so-called clean coal-fired plants. Shanghai is proud to have built Waigaoqiao Power Station, the cleanest of its kind in the world. Every day, 15,000 tons of coal are used. The coal heats up water from the boiler and turns it into steam. The steam then powers a turbine that generates electricity. Nothing new here, except that energy efficiency has been increased compared to old power plants, which represents a huge gain on the amount of coal consumed. In the control room, performance is measured in real time. The plant burns 30% less coal than traditional power plants. The secret lies in the use of new materials that can support very high temperatures and pressure. Water can therefore be heated to such a high temperature that it passes directly to the gaseous state without passing through the boiling phase, increasing energy efficiency.
When it was being built, we wanted to reach a net efficiency of 42%. But today, when the factory is operating at full speed, net efficiency can reach 46.5%. It went from 42 to 46.5%. That's a huge figure. If 1 ton of carbon emits 2.7 tons of CO2, that's a reduction of 2.5 million tons of CO2 in 1 year.
New power plants like these will gradually replace the old ones and will be emulated worldwide.
If the efficiency rate between this bad coal-fired plants and the cleaner one is improved only by 1 percentage point, this is equal to all the coal consumption in Germany. So therefore, we have to also improve the efficiency there. We should not be completely dreaming that tomorrow there will be no new coal-fired power plants. At least we need to build efficient coal-fired power plants and forbid building inefficient coal-fired power plants, but at the same time give incentive to the cleaner technologies so that they are replacing coal-fired power plants.
The decarbonisation programme experts are clear. While China's energy demand is soaring, they will have to switch from coal at some point. The sooner the better. China has predicted that coal consumption should peak in 2030 before declining. Fei Teng regularly consults Professor He, an influential member of the government with whom he discusses the best low-carbon pathways. As always, directives come from central government.
By 2030, China's energy needs will be equivalent to nearly 6 billion tons of standard coal. Fossil fuel production capacity will exceed 10 billion kilowatt hours. That's huge. The government has announced that around the year 2030, CO2 emissions should peak.
This peak means that emissions will continue to increase over the next 15 years before they begin to decline. Energy transition is long to implement. The technologies are ready, but not the policies.
Hydropower, solar, wind, bioenergy technology, they're already ready, but they have difficulties to have bigger share in the energy mix mainly because of the competitiveness, the price issue. They are, in some cases, they are more expensive than for example, coal. So therefore, there is a need, A, to give a support to renewables, and B, to take the support from the polluting technologies to give them less support at least. If we can have an international agreement in Paris, hopefully, we can give incentive to the renewable technologies which can replace coal.
It will be a long time before non-fossil fuel energy sources can fully replace fossil fuel energy sources. The usage of coal combustion will remain high for the near future. It will continue to release CO2. I think the CCS is the most viable option to combat climate change.
One possible technology is CCS, carbon capture and storage. CO2 is captured before it is released into the atmosphere. Then it is separated from the other flue gases, compressed, cooled down, and stored underground in porous geological rock formations. 13 test facilities are currently operating, including 7 in the United States. Their prohibitive cost renders their long-term viability uncertain. And most importantly, will there be sufficient storage capacity? North of Vancouver in Squamish, British Columbia, a team of engineers have developed a surprising prototype to capture CO2, not from factory chimneys, but directly from the air we breathe.
So this is exciting. This is the biggest air contactor we've built yet. And what this is going to do once we turn it on and connect it to the rest of our system is pull air through the device. We spray those with the liquid capture chemical that we have in our system here. And when the air passes through those, it sees this very high surface area of capture chemical, and the CO2 reacts with that and gets absorbed. So the air's come in through the inlet and it comes under our feet here, and at the end it enters this central chamber underneath this fan, and the fan pushes it up at several meters per second, and by the time it's come up here, the air's had 70 or even 80% of the CO2 removed.
The air passes through a large filter which extracts CO2 with a potassium hydroxide solution. Carbon dioxide is then piped into a closed circuit before storage. The aim is to manufacture hundreds of these devices to capture the equivalent carbon emissions of 300,000 cars per year. For now, the earliest data has shown that the device can capture half of the CO2 content in the air.
What we can do with direct air capture technologies is recapture those emissions. We can inject them underground or integrate them in fuel production. Or we can also capture those emissions, and we can even directly synthesize liquid fuels. And these are fuels that are compatible with all of today's infrastructure, but are closed carbon cycle and have no net emissions to the atmosphere, so they don't contribute to climate change.
Would re-injecting CO2 into the ground be the ideal solution?
With the technologies that we are looking at now, we don't have enough perspective to know whether or not we're creating a risk for future generations. Who can guarantee that the stored CO2 wouldn't suddenly escape during an earthquake? I would rather we invest money into rehabilitating forests and ecosystems that naturally stock CO2. I think we're rushing in too fast.
Non, je pense que ça, c'est une fuite en avant.
Is it possible to abandon the era of fossil fuels that our societies were built on? Oil, coal, and natural gas still supply 80% of world energy use. We only have 50 years of oil, 60 years of gas, and 110 years of coal left. One of the obstacles to energy transition is money. Public funding continues to support these powerful lobbies.
Why we see such a strong fossil fuel share is because of the subsidies given to fossil fuels. What does subsidy mean? Subsidy means many governments bring the price of coal, oil and gas down, make it very, very cheap, and the people, of course, the consumers, goes what is cheaper. And this is make artificially cheap, much cheaper than the markets.
We need to put an end to the $650 billion in subsidies and tax exemptions that are allocated to fossil fuel energy every year.
The private sector has felt the winds of change. The world of finance is gathered at the flagship Bloomberg Summit. Businessmen, portfolio managers, and insurance companies representing huge funds are here to do business in low-carbon energy. Politicians have realized the importance of this conference and are on a charm offensive.
The transition to a cleaner energy system, it's not just an opportunity to do business, but it actually, if business is on board, if business is not driving it, then it's not going to happen.
Up until 5 years ago, only a tiny minority of industrial manufacturers were interested in renewable energy. Nowadays, they're a serious lobby and on a mission to make money.
I think that right now, no, we will not see a deal in Paris that adds up to 2 degrees. But if I just ask a slightly different question, can we hit 2 degrees? Then the answer is absolutely yes. It's not, we have many of the technologies, but we are also reducing their costs or developing more technologies with every passing month. I have no doubt we can almost completely decarbonize our energy system. These accelerating technology curves are our friend, and they're all we have, so they better work.
Nowadays, most banks offer their customers the possibility to make green investments. And for the first time, the WTO and Standard & Poor's recommend investing in clean energy.
There's a herd mentality in the financial sector. If one thinks that 10 to 15% of assets are to be invested in clean energy, then that means that this is the business of tomorrow. Therefore, the price of carbon, even though there is not just one, and the speculation of investors creates a snowball effect. Everyone says, that's it. It's happening. It's going to happen. In economics jargon, that is known as a self-fulfilling prophecy. If everyone believes, then it will happen, because everyone will act like it's going to happen.
Governments need to have a market design to give the signal to the private investors that if they invest in the clean energy technologies, they can make money, and if they invest in the old technologies, they may risk losing money. This market design has to be made. Otherwise, we cannot leave everything to the good intentions of the investors. The easiest, most efficient way to give this signal will be through a carbon price.
Putting a price on carbon enables the creation of what we call carbon markets. Their functioning is simple and based on the polluter pays principle. So how does it actually work? Governments set a legal limit or cap on emissions. If a company then exceeds their limit, they can trade permits with another company or risk a heavy fine. On the other hand, if a company reduces its emissions, it can trade its unused permits and make a profit. To date, 17 carbon markets exist in the world, like this one, which recently opened in Beijing. Fei Teng is a regular visitor here. He closely follows developments in the carbon market, which could potentially play a big role in the Chinese scenario.
We need this carbon price for investors, because only through this carbon price, investors will redirect their investment towards a low carbon infrastructure. And secondly, the carbon price is important for consumers to change their behaviors to consume more low carbon products. And through the combination of behavior change of both investor and consumer, and we need this carbon price to change the carbon emission trajectory. In terms of the carbon price, I think we can see from the screen right now that carbon price is about 50 RMB, which is equivalent to 7 or 8 euro per ton of carbon dioxide.
The price of carbon fixed by the government will increase depending on the stringency of each country's environmental policies.
But the current carbon prices are so weak that nobody pays any attention. The best thing would be, in the entire world, there is a carbon price which is gradually rising, and perhaps in 20, 30 years of time, reaching about $50 or so, in order to have an impact on the decisions.
Paris, the final meeting before the DDPP team present their report. Everyone is present, including Fei Teng, Jim Williams, and Emmanuel Guérin. But will they manage to finish the report on time? Tensions are running high. Pathways to decarbonisation are beginning to emerge, but there's still some way to go.
Work discussions around essentially the country pathway analysis. So with the idea of both sharing some insights, all of you have developed independent country analysis, and this was the purpose of this work.
In Germany, the decarbonisation pathway points to a full exit from nuclear power. Pete Zelka, a sociologist and member of the DDPP, hazards a guess that Germany's energy transition won't be that simple.
Germany has introduced this energy transition, which mainly consists of several points. The most prominent one is like the phasing out of nuclear energy by 2022. So nuclear and coal are supposed to be replaced by wind, also by solar, which is also increasing here, and to some degrees also biomass and other renewables. The technology is very, very important, but don't forget about the organizational and social aspects of their work. If they are not tied into that other work, the energy transition will not be doable. It's not possible to have the technology changes as a law coming to the people and the people are just opposing it. As we saw here, nuclear energy ended, although it was a working technology and it was, for in many eyes, a good technology, CO2 neutral, still it ended. And the same can happen with other technologies if the people are not in the boat for those changes.
A closer look at Germany's total emissions reveals that approximately half come from the production of electricity supplied mainly by coal. Is the solution civic power? The concept was introduced in Germany 30 years ago. After the Chernobyl disaster, Schönau, a small village in Germany's Black Forest, decided to take its fate into its own hands and produce its own electricity without nuclear or coal. The national electricity companies took a very dim view of the rebellion. It took 4 years for a handful of men and women, led by Ursula Sladek and her husband Michael, to convince the residents and the local authorities. Sebastian Sladek was a young man when his parents managed this feat. The town has a population of 3,000 and currently supplies 160,000 homes with electricity via the Independent Electricity Cooperative, EWS. It's the story of David versus Goliath, and in this case, the town chased out the nuclear giant. EWS had to overcome a lot of reluctance from the residents. Back in 1990, nobody wanted solar panels on their roofs. So a very symbolic roof was chosen, the roof of the local church.
The system that you see here is a community effort, and many of Schönau's residents have taken part in it. I think that it is important to residents that they be able to invest, depending on their means and environment, and that they have an energy supplier that supports them in the process, which is what EWS does. We have a solar cadastre and can determine the expected energy yield for each roof. We provide support for those who wish to install solar panels. As an energy supplier, there's a lot we can do for residents to help them move from energy consumer to producer.
Dozens of homes have since been equipped with solar panels. 5 megawatts of solar energy is currently being generated in Schönau.
This heavenly energy is the natural energy flow that is ample for all our needs. It is nonviolent, it is not scarce but abundant. It's not transient but permanent. It's not local but everywhere. And once you buy the equipment to capture it, which is now very cost effective, it's free.
To reduce carbon emissions from the energy sector by 90%, Germany must reduce coal power and increase wind power. It's not an easy task, and it isn't to everyone's liking. In Paris, after 18 months of hard work, the decarbonisation scenarios of the world's 15 biggest emitters are ready. It's time for Jeffrey Sachs and his DDPP colleagues to hand over their report. They present their results to Laurence Toubiana, an advisor to the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Laurent Fabius. In a few weeks, the official report will be released in each of the 15 countries.
By doing this exercise, which is really going deep enough for the 2 degrees, they say, oh my God, you can't just tighten a little bit here and there. This is transformation. This really requires going to a new energy system. Well, that's the true message.
It would really be great if what's in the report for each and every country became the basis for a very serious political discussion on how to achieve this deep transformation.
If we could have a club of countries saying, we will do that, even if we have 5, 10, 15 countries who just say that very strongly, that would be a very, very strong signal. And that even could be a network of countries helping each other and inviting others to join. And that even could be better than if it was only in the text or only in the decision of the conference, but already a process that is started. Well, thank you anyway.
Well, good luck.
Okay.
Great.
Merci.
Not all of the 15 countries have reached the target of 1.7 tons of CO2 per capita. The 3 technological triggers will probably not suffice. There should be one more. Our behavior as citizens could be the 4th.
History has shown that when constraints seem unavoidable, the most unlikely solution becomes possible. If I didn't think it were possible, I wouldn't put so much energy into this cause.
I'm not optimistic and I'm not pessimistic because these are different faces, different sides of the same simplistic surrender to fatalism where we treat the future as fate, not choice, and don't take responsibility for creating the future we want. I live in a spirit of applied hope.
In any case, even if an ideal agreement isn't reached in Paris, the movement will continue to grow.
Whatever the outcome of the United Nations Climate Conference, we should already be looking ahead. Decarbonisation could already be happening.
And according to the internet, one Michael C. Muhammad, whoever he is or was, said or wrote, "Everything is going to turn out all right in the end. If it's not all right now, it's not the end yet. Don't let it bother you, just relax and keep on going."